When both you and the narcissist go silent, the world does not become peaceful. It feels like something explodes beneath the surface. In that moment, someone finally begins losing control, and it is not you. Most people assume that mutual silence means the story has ended. They think it means both people have accepted the outcome and moved on. But the truth is often far more unsettling. This is the point where the narcissist begins a real psychological spiral. At the same time, this is often where your healing truly begins. Stay with this, because what happens next is the part almost nobody prepares you for. If this already feels uncomfortably familiar, keep listening. You need to understand the psychological terrain you are stepping into. Understanding it is often what helps people break the pattern for good. Let us go deeper. When both you and the narcissist stop contacting each other, the very first thing that happens on their side is something that can be called the recalibration phase. It is subtle, it is psychological. Most people never notice it because it unfolds in silence, behind the scenes, long before the narcissist ever decides to make another move. When you become quiet, you often experience it as an emotional shift. You see it as setting a boundary. You see it as stepping back. You may even see it as the beginning of healing. The narcissist usually interprets your silence very differently. To them, your silence becomes information. It becomes data that must be analyzed. Your lack of response becomes something they need to decode rather than something they choose to respect. They begin asking themselves how they lost their grip, not how they hurt you. Narcissists generally do not engage in self-reflection the same way emotionally healthy people do. Instead of wondering whether they caused pain, they often begin assessing the situation. Did you become distracted? Are you trying to punish them? Has someone else entered your life? Are you testing them? They search for motives. They search for hidden meanings. They search for threats. Your silence becomes a puzzle they feel compelled to solve because uncertainty destabilizes them. During this recalibration phase, they may not contact you at all. Their silence is not necessarily indifference. Often, it is strategy. They may observe your online activity. They may pay attention to mutual friends. They may quietly notice who interacts with you and how often. They are gathering information. They are waiting to see what your next emotional move will be. Many narcissists believe that people they once controlled will eventually return. Because of this belief, your silence is rarely interpreted as closure. Instead, it is viewed as temporary resistance. This is why they do not always panic right away. They hold back. They assume that eventually you will break the silence first, just as you may have done before. They rely on the patterns they helped create within you. The guilt, the fear of conflict, the hope that peace can somehow be restored. They expect you to give in. When you do not, their recalibration grows more intense. They begin wondering whether their influence is slipping away. That is when the situation starts to feel threatening to them. In their world, silence is never neutral. It is either an opportunity to regain dominance or a danger to their ego. The longer you remain silent, the more unstable the ground beneath them begins to feel. Your silence interrupts the power dynamic they depended upon. When both sides become silent, the emotional experience is dramatically different for you than it is for them. This difference reveals an uncomfortable truth. You often feel the loss. They often feel the inconvenience. When you stop contacting them, you are usually carrying the emotional weight of everything that happened. You are sorting through broken trust. You are trying to understand unanswered questions. You are processing emotional exhaustion. You may feel sadness. You may experience confusion. You may struggle with guilt. You may even grieve the version of yourself that accepted far more than you should have. Your silence often comes from emotional overload. You have reached a point where your mind and body can no longer tolerate the chaos. You are trying to reclaim space. You are trying to reclaim dignity. You are trying to reclaim clarity. That internal struggle is heavy. It affects your sleep. It affects your confidence. It affects your memories. It affects your sense of identity. Meanwhile, the narcissist often interprets the silence through an entirely different lens. They do not usually sit with the loss the way you do. They do not spend much time reflecting on what went wrong. They do not naturally examine how they hurt you. They do not immediately ask themselves what needs to change. Instead, their first reaction is often rooted in inconvenience. Your silence disrupts their routine rather than breaking their heart. They became accustomed to access to your attention, access to your reactions, access to your apologies, access to your caretaking, even access to your arguments. Every emotional response reinforced their sense of importance. When you go silent, that steady stream of validation suddenly stops. This does not necessarily devastate them emotionally. It frustrates them. They experience the absence of supply, much like someone losing access to a service they had come to depend on. It feels disruptive. It feels irritating. It feels inconvenient. Their thoughts are not centered on losing someone meaningful. Instead, they often focus on why you are no longer responding. Your pain and their inconvenience exist in completely different psychological worlds. You are mourning the relationship. They are evaluating their access. You are trying to rebuild yourself. They are trying to understand how your silence affects their ego. You feel the emptiness. They feel the interruption. As time passes, this contrast becomes even more obvious. You begin realizing how much emotional weight you were carrying. You begin recognizing how often you silenced yourself to preserve peace. Meanwhile, they begin questioning why strategies that once worked so easily are no longer effective. Your emotional responsiveness suddenly disappears. The imbalance becomes impossible to ignore. Your silence pushes you toward introspection and healing. Their silence pushes them toward annoyance and entitlement. The emotional burden you carry is profound. The discomfort they experience is often connected not to losing you, but to losing the convenience of your compliance. When both sides remain silent, the narcissist does not experience that quiet as a pause. They do not see it as mutual space. They do not interpret it as two people stepping back. Instead, they often experience it as a direct challenge to their ego. Silence from someone they once controlled feels like rebellion. The narcissist tends to view relationships through the lens of dominance rather than reciprocity. So when you stop responding, stop reaching out, and stop supplying attention, it disrupts the psychological hierarchy they believed existed. They interpret your silence as an act of defiance, even when your intention is simply to protect your peace or regain emotional clarity. In their mind, silence is never neutral. It becomes resistance. It becomes disrespect. It becomes evidence that their influence may be fading away. This is why silence often affects them more deeply than arguments ever did. Arguments still give them relevance. Emotional reactions still give them power. Even anger reassures them that they occupy space in your emotional world. Silence removes them from the center of the stage. That removal threatens the fragile narrative they depend upon. For perhaps the first time, your silence forces them to confront the possibility that they are not as indispensable, desirable, or dominant as they believed themselves to be. Narcissists do not operate from a stable internal sense of worth. Their self-esteem is often built from the outside in. It is held together by attention, reactions, admiration, and validation from the people around them. You were part of that system. Your emotions matter to them. Your responses matter to them. Your pattern of returning after conflict matter to them. Every apology you offered, every attempt to explain yourself, every effort you made to repair the relationship reinforced their sense of influence and superiority. When you go silent, that cycle is interrupted. That interruption forces them into a moment of psychological exposure. It confronts them with something they do not want to acknowledge, even to themselves. It exposes how dependent they became on your engagement. They built a story in which they were the dominant one, the one in control, the one deciding how close you could come and how far you could go. Your silence challenges that story. It suggests that you may have stepped outside the role they assigned to you. That realization destabilizes the carefully managed identity they worked so hard to maintain. Without your reactions, they have nothing to push against, nothing to manipulate, nothing to use as proof of their power. This absence becomes threatening, not because they are grieving the relationship in a deep and emotionally mature way, but because it disrupts the foundation of control that allowed them to feel significant. This is often the point where their internal state becomes restless. They may begin replaying old conversations in their minds. They search for signs they believe they missed. They wonder whether someone else has taken their place. They begin scanning for opportunities to regain dominance, even if they still have not reached out. The silence becomes louder for them than it is for you. They do not know what is happening in your world. They cannot see your thoughts. They cannot predict your choices. That lack of visibility strips away the illusion that they understand and control your behavior. Suddenly, they are no longer standing at the center of your world, and that loss of importance feels psychologically intolerable. Their thinking shifts. Arrogance gives way to anxiety. Entitlement gives way to suspicion. Certainty gives way to instability. All of it can be triggered by something as simple as your absence. When both you and the narcissist retreat into silence, it may appear from the outside that nothing is happening, but internally, the narcissist often begins moving through a predictable series of compensatory behaviors designed to restore their sense of control. One of the most common reactions is the attempt to fill the void your absence created through hoovering, baiting, or triangulation. These behaviors are not random. They are psychological tools used when they feel their influence slipping away. Hoovering often begins when they realize your silence is not temporary. At first, they assume you will return. They believe this because it has happened before. They have come to expect it. When you do not come back, panic can begin to surface. Hoovering becomes an attempt to pull you back into the cycle, not because they suddenly value you in a healthier way, but because losing access to you threatens the stability of their ego. They may send a gentle message. They may bring up a nostalgic memory. They may suddenly describe a crisis that requires your attention. They might appear remorseful. They might seem thoughtful and reflective. They may even become unusually attentive. They adjust their approach to whatever they believe is most likely to work. The goal is not genuine reconnection. The goal is restoring control. If hoovering fails, or if it feels too vulnerable for them, they may shift into baiting. Baiting is designed to provoke an emotional response. It does not matter whether the reaction is positive or negative. What matters is that they caused it. They may post something online intended to trigger jealousy. They may send a cold or dismissive message designed to make you angry. They may create unnecessary drama that forces your attention back onto them. Any reaction restores a sense of relevance. Silence strips away their power. Baiting becomes an attempt to reopen the emotional wound they helped create. They hope you react strongly enough to prove that you are still emotionally available to them. When these strategies fail, they may escalate into triangulation. This involves bringing another person into the situation. It could be an ex-partner, a new romantic interest, a friend, a family member. The purpose is not genuine connection. The purpose is control. They may show off a new relationship. They may suggest that someone else appreciates them more than you ever did. They may exaggerate your silence in ways that position them as the victim. The goal of triangulation is to make you feel insecure, to make you question your value, to make you fear being replaced. It is designed to lure you back into defending your worth or reclaiming your place in their life. These behaviors are not evidence of love. They are evidence of dependence. The narcissist depends on external supply to maintain a sense of identity. When you withdraw that supply, they scramble to repair the damage. Hoovering, baiting, and triangulation are attempts to regain psychological dominance. They are not attempts at emotional closeness. Their reactions are often driven by fear, by entitlement, by disruption to the ego, all triggered by your silence. As the silence stretches on, something profound begins to unfold. Most people never expect it. You may interpret the quiet as movement toward peace. You may see it as the beginning of closure. The narcissist often experiences the same silence as growing unease. Your silence is not calming to them. It represents a loss of control. Because their identity depends so heavily on the reactions of others, especially people who once revolved around them, the absence of your response activates an internal alarm. What matters here is understanding this difference. Your quiet is not their peace. It becomes their panic. Narcissists often rely on emotional stimulation from others to support a fragile sense of self. They seek attention, admiration, conflict, drama, anything that places them at the center of someone else's emotional world. When you stop providing that energy, they begin feeling an internal collapse. They struggle to regulate themselves without external feedback. Your silence removes that feedback. A psychological chain reaction begins. At first, they may dismiss your silence. They pretend it means nothing. They act detached, unaffected, sometimes even relieved. But this reaction is often a protective facade. As time passes, the quiet becomes harder to ignore. Without your attention supporting their inflated self-image, they begin feeling overlooked, insignificant, irrelevant. These emotions are deeply uncomfortable because they touch their greatest fear, the fear of being ordinary, invisible, unimportant. While you may be using the silence to gather strength and rebuild yourself, they experience the same silence as an emotional void threatening the identity they constructed. Your nervous system slowly begins calming down. The constant tension and unpredictability start fading. The fog begins to lift. You start recognizing your own worth again. You reconnect with pieces of yourself that had been pushed aside. You discover clarity within the quiet. They discover chaos. The contrast becomes sharper the longer the silence continues. They may begin replaying old interactions repeatedly. They imagine different scenarios. They invent explanations for why you no longer engage. The uncertainty slowly eats away at them. They do not necessarily miss the relationship itself. They miss the reflection of themselves they once saw through your reactions. While your silence becomes healing, theirs becomes destabilizing. You feel pieces of yourself returning. They feel pieces of their carefully constructed identity slipping away. What feels peaceful and necessary for you becomes threatening and agitating for them. This difference exposes the imbalance that existed all along. It reveals that the quiet is setting you free while slowly unraveling them from within. As the silence settles between both of you, something begins shifting inside you. It often feels slow, confusing, and strangely relieving at the same time. Your nervous system, which spent so long living in a constant state of alertness throughout the relationship, finally receives an opportunity to stop preparing for the next emotional impact. Relationships with narcissistic dynamics often create chronic hypervigilance. You learn to anticipate moods. You study reactions. You monitor the emotional climate around you.